Before we dive into today's episode, I want to share something with you that I'm really excited about. If anxiety, panic, or avoidance has been keeping you from living the life you want, not because you don't know what to do, but because fear keeps holding you back, I created something just for you. It's called Stop Avoiding and Start Living, a 5-day live experience with me where we focus on breaking the cycle of avoidance, quieting the noise in your head, and actually taking steps toward the life you want. All week, I'll be teaching you practical step by step tools, going live coaching, and answering your questions so you're not doing any of it alone. And there'll be no forcing, no white knuckling, just real strategies to help you feel more confident and free. And because this experience is live and interactive, spots are limited. We start on April 13th, and it's just $97. This is less than the cost of one therapy session. So if you're ready to stop letting fear call the shots, start building self trust, and actually start living again, I'd love to see and support you inside. You can learn more at the link in the show notes. I'm Shannon Ireland, your host of a Healthy Push podcast. I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. Everything used to be hard for me. Even just driving 5 minutes from my house used to feel impossible. But now I absolutely live for travel and adventure, and I experience lots of peace and joy. I've not only reclaimed my life, but I've helped hundreds of others to do the same. Here, we stop managing anxiety and instead we create a healthy relationship with it. One where you say goodbye to the anxious thoughts, symptoms, panic attacks, and fears, and you actually live your life. Forget complicated strategies, quick fixes, or the same old hacks you've heard 100 times before. Each week, I'll bring you simple, actionable advice and honest conversations that lead to real, long-term healing. You aren't just an anxious person, my friend. There are reasons why you're struggling with anxiety, and these are things you can fix and heal from. And this is where that journey begins. Welcome. You're right where you're meant to be. Hello, and welcome back to a Healthy Push podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about flying anxiety. And I want to talk to you about why flying feels so much scarier than anything else, because this is something I hear so often from my community members and my students is that I don't know, Shannon, like I want to travel, I want to fly, I want to get on a plane. Like I have so much that I want to do, but I just can't even imagine myself getting on an airplane. Like, that is the ultimate fear. That is the ultimate stuckness, right? So, if you struggle with flying anxiety, this episode is so for you. And I don't mean that in a generic way. I mean, if flying feels like the thing for you, like the thing that feels bigger than anything and everything else, the thing that makes you question your recovery or your progress or your capabilities, this conversation is for you. Flying often feels like the ultimate fear, like the thing that proves whether or not you're actually, quote, okay. And because of that, it carries so much pressure, so much meaning, and so much fear. So, I want to talk to you about why flying feels so much scarier than everything else and why it takes up so much mental space and why this fear makes so much sense, especially if you struggle with panic or agoraphobia. Okay, so I've got to start here. If you're familiar with my story, you already know I struggled with anxiety, severe panic disorder, and agoraphobia for about 15 years. And for me, so much of my anxiety revolves around losing control, being stuck, and being far from safety. And flying hit every single one of those fears. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, it does for you too. But what's interesting is that my flying anxiety had like very little, almost nothing to do with planes themselves. Like I was not lying awake at night worried about turbulence or crashes or my general safety. The fear lived in other places. It lived in questions like, what if I panic and I can't get out, right? I can't escape. What if something happens to me while I'm on the plane? Like, what if something physically happens to me? Things get so bad and I can't get help. What if I lose control in front of everyone? This was such a major one for me. Like, I was always so afraid. I'm going to panic. I'm going to totally freak out. Everyone's going to see it, and I am going to embarrass the heck out of myself. Also, what if I need the bathroom and I can't get there? If you're nodding along right now, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I get all of this. This is me. I want you to know you're not alone. You're not crazy. This is a very real and very common experience. So, let's talk about why flying feels different, but actually isn't. So, one of the reasons flying feels so intense is because we place it in a completely different category than everything else. Whenever we're working through my Panic to Peace program, we always inevitably get to that point where so many people in the group are like, flying is the ultimate. Like, I can't even imagine. I haven't flown in years. Like, I want to fly so bad. I want to take a trip. I want to go, but I can't even imagine. And so many people put flying on a pedestal, and truly flying becomes the thing, like the ultimate scenario, the ultimate test, like the one place where anxiety would be absolutely unbearable or even dangerous. So, here's one of the most important things that I want you to hear: the anxiety that you experience on a plane is not different from the anxiety that you experience in your car or at work or at home. Your body is doing the same thing. Your body is having the same response. Your nervous system is responding in the same way. Sure, you might feel more stuck because you can't get off the plane and that ramps things up, but you don't have to get off of the plane. Just like you don't have to get out of your car, you don't need to get out of work, you don't need to exit, right? You don't need to escape. What's really different is the story that your brain tells you about what anxiety means when you're on a plane. Right? I always say so much of how anxiety gets heightened is through stories, is through meaning that we give it. We create so much of this internal stuckness. So, I want to talk about internal stuckness versus external because we often say, I'm scared because I'll be stuck on the plane, right? Like, I can't get off. Like, as soon as that door closes and I know, oh my gosh, my anxiety was present like on the way to the airport, going through security, all the places. But where it really ramped up and always became the worst was when that plane door was shutting. And I knew, like, okay, this is it. And we can't get off. But it was also that acceptance of, like, okay, this is it. And we can't get off. But being stuck on the plane, that plane door closing, isn't actually the problem. The problem is internal, this internal stuckness that we create. It's this belief that if anxiety shows up, I'm not going to be able to handle it. I'm not going to be able to manage it. I'm not going to be able to get through it. It's going to be so, so bad. It's not going to stop. I'm going to totally all the things, right? But the truth and the reality is, you can feel just as stuck sitting in traffic, sitting in a meeting at work, being in the line at the grocery store, being home alone. But flying gets elevated because it symbolizes this ultimate trappedness. And when your brain decides something represents danger, like especially the biggest, baddest, worst danger, it treats it like a threat, right? Even if you've handled similar anxiety 100 times elsewhere. I can't tell you how many times my anxiety primarily showed up in the car. Like, it was so dreadful, so many car rides. I remember it just always being like in full force. And even though I had worked through it so many times, like experienced so much anxiety in the car, when I would go to fly and take trips, I none of that came into play. It was like my brain could not remember any of that. Like, we've worked through anxious moments, we've worked through so many panic attacks. Like, you're gonna be able to get on this plane and you're gonna be able to handle whatever happens. No, 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 no. Like, my brain did not go to that place. So I think this is a good segue to talk about anticipatory anxiety because this is the big thing that comes into play with flying. For many, many people, the hardest part is not the flight itself. It's the hours, the days, the weeks, or months leading up to the flight. Like, thinking about the trip, replaying worst case scenarios, you're monitoring your body for how you're feeling. You're wondering, how anxious am I going to feel? Am I going to experience the worst panic attack I've ever had? Am I going to be the person running up the aisle begging to get off the plane? Am I going to actually ask to get off the plane? I'm speaking this all from experience. And by the time you step foot in the airport, your nervous system has already been running a freaking marathon, right? And then you add on top of all the anticipation that you've done prior to actually getting to the airport, you are going through security. You are experiencing crowds, right? Busyness. Airports can be very loud. They can be very bright. They can be very overstimulating. You're also dealing with waiting, right? And boarding and the time pressure. Like, I got to get to my gate and I got to make sure I'm on time and all of that. Like, there's so much at play. And of course, your body is on high alert, right? It's been preparing for danger for like days, weeks, months. And it's like you've already lived this trip several times because you've been playing it out in your head for so long. And chances are you've only played out the worst case scenarios, right? And this is the thing with anticipatory anxiety. And this goes back to so much of the anxiety is created with the stories, right? And this is so much of what we focus on in my Panic to Peace program, in my Healthy Push coaching and community. Like, we focus so much on this because when you start to change the internal stuff that's going on, it actually changes your external experiences, like how much of the sensations and symptoms you're experiencing, how much panic you're experiencing, all the things. So chances are your brain, right, is not saying, well, yeah, there's probably going to be some anxiety and you might even panic, but you're going to work through it and you're going to be okay. You actually are probably going to have some fun, right? You're going to create memories and you're going to be really happy that you went. Like, laughable, right? Like, anticipatory anxiety does not tell us this version of the story, even though it's oftentimes what actually happens. I've worked with hundreds of people who struggle with flying anxiety, who like specifically sign up to work with me that they're like, I want to tackle this. This is so important to me. And I'm like, okay. And what I hear consistently after they've taken their flight and after they went on the trip was, you know what, Shannon, it wasn't that bad. Like, there was some anxiety, but it wasn't that bad. Or there really wasn't much anxiety. Like, I was expecting way more. I was expecting panic and I didn't panic. Or I hear I had fun and I was actually able to be present. Like, I can't believe how present I was. And I'm so glad that I went. This is often the reality of pushing yourself to take this really scary, quote, big leap. And then you get that reward and you get that recognition of like, oh my gosh, this is just anticipatory anxiety, right? Like, I fed my brain so much stuff that was so untrue. And I'm so glad that I showed myself it didn't have to look that way and it doesn't have to look that way. So I know it's really hard not to go along with all the anticipatory anxiety. Trust me, I understand. But you've got to do your best to resist going along with all those stories, trying to problem solve, trying to figure out, trying to like meticulously plan, right? Trying to make sure that you're not going to feel so anxious and not feel so panicky during this trip. And you've got to remind yourself of your capabilities and also of the realities. So I also feel like this is important, and I have to say this here, and I don't think this gets said enough. Flying and traveling are naturally anxiety producing. Even people without anxiety disorders feel overwhelmed by airports, by time constraints, by the unpredictability, by the lack of control, right? So, if you already have a sensitive nervous system, flying might feel a little bit more intense, but that doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong or that there's something wrong with you. Anxiety doesn't mean don't go. It means your nervous system is just doing its job, maybe a little too well, but you can take it with you. Something I often say is if you're struggling with an anxiety disorder and you have been for especially a solid amount of time, you can convince yourself that it's not okay for you to experience natural anxiety. And when I say natural anxiety, I mean there are places and situations that are going to be naturally anxiety producing, like the airport, right? Like a plane, getting on a plane, like being in a doctor's office, being in busy, crowded places, like maybe at a concert, right? There are things that are naturally anxiety producing. And it's really harmful when you get in your head and you tell yourself these stories that it's not okay for you to feel anxious and you shouldn't feel anxious and there's something wrong with you. And you don't just simply recognize, this is totally human and this is okay. So I think, especially relating to flying and traveling, you've got to give yourself grace and acknowledge, it's okay to feel anxious. It makes sense to feel anxious and you've got to allow yourself to be human. This will help make things a lot less hard because I always tell my students, if you put more pressure into the mix and you force yourself and you convince yourself it should look this way, I shouldn't feel, or whatever it is, it's going to make things so much harder because it's just going to trigger your nervous system to be even more on alert. So if you feel anxious, even about looking at flights, about booking the trip, about getting on the plane, all of it's okay. It makes so much sense, especially if you have not flown for months or years, or it's not something that you do very often. I say all the time, if our brains are not very familiar with something, if our brains are not very comfortable with something, they're going to push back and they don't like things that are unfamiliar. And so if you don't fly very often, you're going to likely have a response, right? And that's okay. But do your best not to create more of that internal chaos, right? So I want to share this. One of the biggest shifts for me relating to flying anxiety was when I stopped seeing flying as something that I had to conquer, like this big mountain that I had to conquer. And I just started seeing it as something I could experience imperfectly. I could go to the airport, be bawling my eyes out, which was typically the case. I could be shaking. I could have my heart pounding. I could feel awful. I could have not eaten because I was so scared to get on the plane. I could let it look in all those ways and have that be okay. I didn't need to feel calm. I didn't need to feel confident. I didn't need to stop anxiety from showing up. I simply needed to let myself have the experience, let it look however it looked. And I needed to learn, which I did, that I could feel anxious. I could feel incredibly stuck. I could experience panic. I could feel really uncomfortable and still be safe. And, that realization didn't just change flying for me, it changed a lot of my entire relationship with anxiety. I always tell people the healing happens outside of the plane, right? The healing happens primarily outside of the car. Yes, you have to do these things, but the work of changing your relationship with anxiety really happens inwardly. It's such an inward experience. But I'll tell you, the more I started getting on flights and just saying, Shannon, it's okay that you feel anxious and it's okay. This is probably going to be hard and it is probably going to look a mess. And I definitely remember crying and I'm sure people could see it. And I just got to the point where I was like, you know what? Just let it look however it looks. It's okay. And we're doing this and we're going to stay focused on why we're doing this and just do our best to focus on what is this experience going to look like, right? When the plane lands and I get to do this really fun thing, I get to be in this place that I want to be in, I get to have fun with family and friends. How am I going to feel during the trip? How am I going to feel after? Really focusing on that helped a ton too. So, I just want to say in general, if flying feels impossible right now, it does not mean that it always will. I know that this is really hard to believe, especially if you've put flying on such a pedestal like I did for years, because I always thought, I was always convinced, there's no way I'm ever going to get on a plane and just feel at peace and feel calm and just be able to read a book or watch a show. But I've taken so many flights international within the States. I've done it alone, just with me and my daughter. I have no problems flying now. And if you had told me 10 years ago that this would be me now, I would have obviously laughed in your face and been like, Do you remember the girl who would literally take medication to fly? Do you remember the girl who would still be shaking, panicking, crying? Like, it's just mind blowing. So I know you might not believe that it's possible, but it is so, so possible. And just because your nervous system has learned to associate flying with it being a threat doesn't mean it can't unlearn that, right? Like, it can unlearn that. And it's really not about just like, I've got to face the fear. I got to do this. I got to force myself, right? It's about understanding what's happening and responding differently over time. I always say when you have that consistent, repetitious, healthy response to anxiety, that's when it's going to stop showing up in all the places, in all the situations, no matter what you're doing, even flying. Okay, so if this episode resonates and you're wanting more support, I want to tell you about my mini course specifically for flying anxiety. And it really walks you through what's happening in your body, why flying feels so intense, and how to approach it all in a way that builds safety and trust instead of fear. So in it, I am practical. Like, I am not that person that's like, oh, just meditate and breathe and like, no, like, I am a practical person. So in the class, I teach you how to calm that pre-flight anxiety, that anticipatory anxiety, how to stop overthinking before you even leave the house or book the flight. I teach you how to navigate that in-flight anxiety and panic without the feeling of trappedness or out of control. I teach you what to do with the scary thoughts so that they don't spiral into symptoms and panic. I give you practical tools to handle panic and discomfort. That's not just breathe through it or use sour gummies or any of that BS. I also teach you how to book the flight and feel excited about it. And ultimately, the class teaches you how to stop letting fear run the show and start going on the flights and taking the trips and having those experiences and creating those memories. And really just getting back to the things that you value, the things that are so important to you. You know, two of my biggest values are freedom and independence. And I'm sure those might be true for you too, especially if you're like wanting to fly and travel and adventure and see the world. And if those things are also your values, you owe it to yourself. Like, we got to look at this, right? And we've got to allow ourselves to not make flying the ultimate thing. So if you want to check out the class, I'll link to it in the show notes. But I just want you to hear me. Like, flying doesn't have to be the thing that defines your recovery. You are allowed to want freedom and feel afraid. And you're allowed to take steps forward without feeling ready and without feeling capable and without feeling confident. Okay, until next time, keep taking healthy action. I hope you loved this episode of A Healthy Push. If you have, I'd be so grateful if you could leave me a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. This helps people to find the show and get the support they need. And if you know someone who could use a little push, be sure to share this episode with them. And for even more support, head over to ahealthypush.com for show notes and loads of tips, tools, and inspiration to help you on your recovery journey. I'll see you next week.